Hey everyone! Tonight, we're going somewhere a little different, not into the woods or down some dark, stormy road, but right into the heart of a quiet suburban home. You know the kind with neat hedges, shiny floors, and secrets buried deeper than the foundation. And let me tell you, you probably wouldn't survive this if it happened to you. Not because it's bloody or loud, but because betrayal this quiet seeps under your skin and rots everything from the inside. So before you get too cozy, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you actually enjoy what I'm doing here. And hey, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is where you are. Now turn off the lights, maybe turn on a fan for some soft background noise. And let's begin tonight's journey. It started with a video, just a simple little message on my phone. One I wasn't expecting, and certainly not the kind that would punch a hole through the quiet little illusion I'd been clinging to for years. The screen lit up. It was from Tyler, my grandson. Sweet boy, quiet, always watching the room more than speaking in it. He never caused trouble, not the type. So when I saw his name, I smiled, expecting maybe a funny meme or some blurry photo of the dog. Instead, it was a video. I tapped play. And just like that, the floor under my life cracked open. There she was, Melanie, my only child, standing right in the center of that spotless kitchen. The same one I paid for. Marble countertops that gleamed like they belonged in a glossy magazine, imported Italian light fixtures overhead, all of it financed by me when she couldn't swing the payments. She didn't see Tyler filming. Too busy basking in the adoration of her little circle of friends, the polished, self-important ones I never much cared for. "Oh please, she's dead weight?" Melanie's voice rang out sharp and careless. A laugh followed. Hers. Their friends. Cruel, thoughtless. I mean, what would she even do if she wasn't living here? She went on, twisting the dagger with every syllable. She's basically just a guest in her own grave at this point. More laughter. Someone that woman with the fake laugh, what was her name? Carla chimed in. Well, at least you're doing your good deed letting her stay right. Exactly, Melanie grinned. I pay for everything anyway. I swear for a second I couldn't hear anything but my own pulse thrumming heavy in my ears. The lies. Those weren't even what stung the most. It was the way she said it. The casual mockery. As if I was nothing but some relic gathering dust in the corner of her picture-perfect life. She had no idea how wrong she was. My hand gripped the kitchen counter to steady myself. The marble felt cool beneath my fingertips, a detail I paid for, of course. My chest tightened, but I kept my face blank calm. You learn, after enough years, not to let emotions spill out. That's how they control you. They feed off the protest, the hurt. Turn it into ammunition. I hit save on the video, dropped it quietly into a private folder. Not for confrontation, not yet. But I'd need it. Taking a deep breath, I let my eyes roam the spotless kitchen. The sleek fridge, the matching appliances. The ridiculous chandelier Melanie insisted on, the one she couldn't afford, but that I covered because it's an investment mom. My money, my name on the paperwork, my sacrifice. But suddenly, none of it felt like mine. There were no tears in my eyes, no scream lodged in my throat. Just this. This growing, heavy coldness curling deep inside my ribs. Something had shifted, like a door in my chest had clicked shut. I wiped my hands dry, turned off the phone, walked toward my room. No, not my room. The guest suite. That little corner Melanie so graciously allowed me to have in the house I rescued. My steps were slow, deliberate, almost serene. The storm had already started, but this time, I'd be the one steering it. Hours passed, maybe more. I sat by the window in that little suite, staring out at the neat, manicured lawn. The same one I paid landscapers to revive after Melanie couldn't afford them anymore. This house looked perfect. White pillars, tall windows, polished floors that caught the sun just right. A magazine spread come to life, but it was all built on my sacrifice. 8 years ago, when Melanie's marriage collapsed, like a badly built deck, she came to me. Tears, shaking hands, desperate. Please, Mom. The bank's going to take the house. I can't. Tyler. I don't know what to do. I didn't hesitate. I cashed out my retirement savings, sold my little condo, handed her the down payment to keep the house, and I moved in, a promise whispered between sobs. It'll be your home too, Mom. Always, always. That word feels like a bad joke now. For 8 years, I lived here quietly, never demanding anything, paid the mortgage, covered repairs, footed the tax bills, quietly, willingly, because that's what a mother does. You protect your family. You sacrifice. And somewhere along the way, I became invisible. Melanie's gratitude faded into expectation. My support turned to background noise. My presence became an inconvenience. Dead weight. That's what I'd become in her eyes. The words sat heavy on my tongue, bitter, final, but not anymore. The dead weight. It's about to rise. The next morning, I stood at the kitchen sink washing my teacup, watching sunlight spill across the floor, thinking about that video like it was on a loop behind my eyes. Melanie breezed past, heels clicking on the phone as usual. Some business call. Probably barking orders at her assistant or charming some investor. She paused just long enough to toss a distracted smile my way. "Morning, Mom," she said lightly, not waiting for a reply. I stayed quiet, drying my hands on the dish towel, watching her disappear down the hall. Tyler sat at the breakfast bar, head bent over his cereal, earbuds dangling from his hoodie. His eyes flicked up to meet mine, cautious but warm. "Thanks for sending the video," I whispered softly, just enough for him to hear. His cheeks flushed a little. He shrugged. "Figured you should know." A pause. Then quieter, "Sorry." "Don't be." I smiled, a real one this time. "You did the right thing." After Tyler left for school, I took my coffee to the little sunroom. It was quiet there. My sanctuary, if you could call a corner of someone else's house that. I sat for a long time, sipping slowly, thinking. Not panicking. That part of me, the anxious, eager to please version, was quiet now. Like it had packed its bags and left overnight. A knock at the door startled me. Not the front door, the side door. The one only Margaret ever used. Margaret was, well, if you've ever had one of those friends who's half church lady, half private detective, you get the picture. She could sense when something was off, even when I plastered on my best, "Everything's fine" face. She stepped in, setting down a container of muffins wrapped neatly in a towel. "Baked too many again," she explained, eyes narrowing ever so slightly as she took me in. "You all right? You look thoughtful." "Just tired," I said automatically, but my voice wobbled on the word, betraying me. She gave me that look. The one that says, "I know better." We sat, tea brewed, muffins sliced, and eventually the words tumbled out. "Not everything, but enough." The video, the things Melanie said, how long it's been building, the slow, steady erasure of everything I've done, who I am. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "You've done more than most mothers ever would," she said softly. 8 years. Paying for that house, letting her rewrite the story like you're some burden. I exhaled, my fingers curling around the warm teacup. I thought keeping the peace was worth it. She tilted her head. "At what price? Evie, that's the thing. It wasn't one big moment. It was all the little ones, the way Melanie sidestepped gratitude, the backhanded comments about me adjusting to retirement, the expectation that I'd stay quiet, keep funding her life, but fade quietly into the background. And me, I let it happen. Because it was easier. Because I wanted to believe she'd come around. But last night, that video, it peeled the illusion away. Margaret leaned in, voice low but steady. "You've done enough. Maybe it's time she learns what standing on her own really feels like." Her words settled into my bones, heavy but not uncomfortable. More like armor. Later that afternoon, I found myself at the community center, folding clothes for the church charity drive. The familiar hum of voices, the rattle of donation bins, it grounded me. Funny, isn't it, the place people go to feel useful, to feel seen, when their own home doesn't offer that anymore. As I folded jackets and sorted scarves, I thought about everything I'd done for Melanie. The retirement I cashed out, the condo I sold, the mortgage payments I covered month after month, year after year. And all for what? To be reduced to dead weight in my daughter's eyes, to be a tolerated fixture in a house I saved. No more. The resolve inside me simmered low and steady, like the first glowing ember of a fire that's been waiting to catch. That night, dinner was quiet. Tyler at a friend's house. Just me and Melanie at the long, polished dining table, the one I bought, of course. She sipped her wine, swirling it like she was practicing for some elegant dinner party. So she began, voice light, casual to rehearsed. We've decided to host a little gathering next weekend. Some of my business contacts and their spouses. I nodded neutral. That sounds lovely. She leaned forward, her smile tightening ever so slightly. It's upscale. You know how these people are. Everything has to be perfect. So, her eyes flicked away, then back, calculating. I think it's best if you stay in your suite during the party. The words sliced cleaner than any insult could have. But my face? Blank. Years of practice. My hands stayed steady on my lap, my voice even. Of course. Relief softened her features as if my quiet compliance was expected. I knew you'd understand. She lifted her glass. These people can be so judgmental. I don't want anyone making assumptions about our situation. Our situation? What I'd become a situation. I sat there a moment longer, absorbing her words, letting them soak into that growing steel inside me. She chatted on about caterers and wine pairings, completely oblivious to the quiet hurricane building in the chair across from her. When she finally stopped talking, I stood. If you'll excuse me, I'll head to my room. She smiled brightly as if dismissing a guest. Thank you for being so understanding. I left the room, my steps steady, my heart quiet, focused. She believed she was in control, that I was powerless, that my silence was submission. She had no idea. The morning after that little dinner conversation, I woke before sunrise. The house was still quiet, the kind of stillness that feels heavy, like the calm before a storm. Melanie was already gone by the time I emerged from my suite, probably off to meet with the caterers or maybe the florist. She had that party on her mind, obsessing over every detail like it was some royal event that would define her entire existence. Fine by me. I had my own plans brewing. By mid-morning, I stood in front of a small, nondescript law office tucked between a tailor's shop and a bakery on Elm Street. The brass plaque beside the door read, Law Offices of Jonathan Aldridge. It wasn't grand, but it was reputable, exactly what I needed. The receptionist, a kind young woman with tired eyes and a knowing smile, ushered me in. Mr. Aldridge stood as I entered, extending a hand. Mrs. Harper, good to see you again. I shook his hand, steady, confident. Thank you for making the time. Of course. He gestured to the chair across from his desk. You sounded determined on the phone. I offered a small, dry smile. That's one way to put it. The room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon oil, and the soft tick of a wall clock punctuated the silence as I explained what I wanted to trust. Irrevocable, complete control over my assets, my accounts, the house, everything transferred legally beyond Melanie's reach. Mr. Aldridge listened without interruption, his expression unreadable but attentive. Finally, he nodded. You've thought this through. Long enough. And your daughter. She doesn't know, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. And she doesn't need to. Aldridge tapped his pen against a legal pad, considering. I'll need to prepare the paperwork, transfer titles, revise your will, move any liquid assets. Do it! A brief smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Understood. And your grandson. Do you want him included? I hesitated for a beat, thinking of Tyler's soft eyes, the way his voice wavered when he sent me that video. He was still young, still living under her shadow, but he had seen through it. That counted for something. Yes, I said, but with conditions. He inherits at 25. Until then, full oversight. Aldridge scribbled notes, nodding. Prudent. I signed the initial forms, my hand steady, the pen gliding across the paper, like the final stroke of a painting long overdue. By the time I left the office, the first chess piece had been moved. The walk home was brisk. The autumn air nipped at my cheeks, but I hardly noticed. My mind buzzed with quiet satisfaction, the kind that comes when you finally stop playing defense and start building your own offense. Melanie was in the living room when I returned, lounging on the sofa, phone pressed to her ear, rattling off flower arrangements and color schemes. Her voice chirped with that polished, practiced charm I used to believe in. Now it grated like nails on glass. She didn't even glance at me as I slipped upstairs. Good. Let her stay distracted. In my suite, I pulled out the old lockbox from the closet floor. It was heavy with documents, deeds, receipts, financial statements, all meticulously organized over the years. Proof of every penny I poured into this house. Proof she never thought I kept. I flipped through them, the evidence of a lifetime of sacrifice. It wasn't anger that burned through me now, it was clarity. Melanie thought I was weak because I kept quiet. Because I never made a scene. Because I didn't wave my contributions like a flag. But silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. The next few days passed in careful rhythm. I played my part, the quiet, agreeable mother, conveniently invisible whenever Melanie needed me to be. Meanwhile, Aldridge worked quickly. The trust papers were drawn, titles transferred, accounts secured. Melanie didn't notice, she was too busy orchestrating her grand event. On Friday morning, I stopped by the retirement community on Willow Avenue. They had gardens there, real ones, with lavender peonies and roses that actually smelled like something not like the plastic perfect arrangements Melanie paraded through the house. The apartment manager gave me a tour, small but peaceful. Sunlight streamed through the wide windows, and the hum of life felt different there, softer, kinder. I signed the lease without hesitation, freedom in neat black ink. By the time I returned home, Melanie was pacing the kitchen, stress etched across her features. The caterer canceled, she snapped into her phone, fingers drumming against the marble countertop, the one I paid for. Find someone else, I don't care how much it costs. She spotted me at the doorway, forced a brittle smile. Hi, Mom, she mouthed, then turned away. I watched her for a long moment. Watched the panic simmer beneath the polish. She was so used to standing on the foundation I built, she didn't even realize the cracks forming beneath her. Let them spread. Later that night, I sat by the window in my suite, watching the shadows stretch long across the lawn. I thought about all the years I spent patching those cracks for her, paying bills, fixing problems, swallowing insults in the name of peace. But peace built on erasure isn't peace at all. It's surrender. Not anymore. The papers were signed. The trust was real. My exit was planned. Melanie believed she owned the story, that I was just a footnote in her polished, curated life. But every carefully hidden document, every quiet, strategic move I made was the next chapter she never saw coming. The storm was brewing. But this time, I wasn't caught in it. I was steering it. The house was unusually quiet the next morning. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the occasional chirp of birds beyond the garden, but inside, just silence. No clattering heels, no sharp orders barked down the hallway. Melanie had left early, likely scrambling to salvage her precious dinner party now that the caterer had backed out. I moved through the house deliberately, my steps soft against the hardwood floors I had refinished after her divorce, the ones she proudly showed off to her friends, claiming she renovated the whole space herself. The irony never stopped being amusing. By mid-morning, I stood in the small sunroom, sipping my tea, watching as a sleek black car pulled into the driveway. Not a car I recognized. Moments later, a sharply dressed man stepped out, tall, expensive suit, leather briefcase in hand. His shoes alone probably cost more than my first car. He approached the front door, pausing only to check the name on the mailbox. Harper? Still my name, still my house. I waited, hearing the firm knock echo through the front hall. Melanie wasn't home, so I answered. The man's eyes flicked over me, assessing. Not dismissive, just curious. Mrs. Harper. His voice was smooth, professional. I'm Richard Langston. Your daughter asked me to drop off some documents. I didn't blink. Of course. Come in. He stepped inside, glancing briefly at the grand staircase, the high ceilings, the immaculate floors. His expression remained perfectly neutral, but I'd seen that look before, calculating. People always underestimated me in this house, but they never underestimated the house itself. He handed me a thick envelope heavy with paperwork. Melanie mentioned you'd review these and get them back to us. I didn't open it immediately, and these are final drafts for property transfer, power of attorney documents. A few financial agreements he listed smoothly, like reading off a grocery list. I let a small, unreadable smile touch my lips. All ready to sign, I imagine. Yes, ma'am. Just a formality, really. Of course, I echoed, accepting the envelope. Thank you, Mr. Langston. I'll take a look. He hesitated, sensing. Something. Maybe the quiet edge in my voice. Maybe the way I didn't rush to open the documents didn't flutter with nervousness like he expected. "Good day, Mrs. Harper. You as well." Once the door clicked shut behind him, I carried the envelope to my suite, placed it gently on my desk, and exhaled. Predictable. All of it. Melanie was pushing faster now. The cracks in her performance were widening, and desperation always accelerates recklessness. I peeled the envelope open, spreading the documents across the desk. Transfer of ownership of the house, the accounts, even healthcare directives buried deep within the stack. Her signature already scrawled neatly on the appropriate lines. The only blank spaces, mine. The audacity still had the power to make me smile. It wasn't boldness. It was entitlement disguised as inevitability. I gathered the papers into a tidy pile and tucked them away in the lockbox with everything else. Proof, evidence, ammunition. Later that afternoon, I met Tyler at his school. It was parent-teacher conference day, and despite the circumstances, I kept my promise to attend. Melanie was conveniently too busy, but I showed up quiet, steady, present. His teachers praised him as always, bright, respectful, reserved, but attentive. I watched him across the classroom, noticing the quiet way he sat absorbing everything around him. Not quick to speak, but sharp when he did. So much like me, more than I ever realized. Afterward, we sat outside on a bench beneath an old maple tree, the autumn leaves scattered at our feet. "Thanks for coming, Grandma," he said, his voice soft. "Of course," I replied, brushing a leaf from his shoulder. He hesitated, eyes down. Did you get the papers from the lawyer?" I paused, surprised by his awareness. "How do you know about that?" "I heard Mom on the phone. She was bragging about how it was finally almost done, how you'd sign without even realizing what it meant." A cold calm settled over me. "And what do you think it means?" He looked up, eyes clear and steady. "It means she thinks you're weak." I exhaled slowly, the sting of truth sharp and clean. "And do you?" "No," he said, firm. "I sent you that video because I know better." I placed a hand over his. "You did the right thing, Tyler. You always have a choice. Remember that." We sat in silence for a while, the leaves crunching gently underfoot, the wind carrying the faintest chill through the air. Later that evening, back at the house, I prepared dinner quietly while Melanie stormed through the kitchen, barely acknowledging me. The party stress was mounting, but beneath that was something more. She could feel the shift. She didn't understand it yet, but she sensed it. Over dinner, her frustration finally boiled over. "I'm getting tired of having to handle everything," she snapped, stabbing at her salad. "The mortgage, the utilities, the property taxes on top of planning this party." I sipped my tea unmoved. "Funny, I thought I'd been handling all of that." She froze, eyes narrowing. "Well, now it's my responsibility. Isn't that what you wanted?" She blinked momentarily, caught in her own trap. Her voice softened, false sweetness coating her words. "I just thought we were partners, handling things together." I let the silence stretch. "Of course, dear," I said, finally rising from the table. "Partners." Her relief was palpable, but as I turned away, I smiled to myself. The only thing we were partners in now was her downfall. The next morning carried a crispness in the air that only comes with the early whispers of fall. The sunlight crept through the tall windows, casting long golden streaks across the hardwood floors I refinished with my retirement money, though Melanie never quite remembered that detail. She had gone out again, another meeting with the event planner, another last-minute floral crisis to solve, another appearance to polish for the dinner party that was beginning to unravel beneath her carefully rehearsed smile. I took my tea to the garden, the one I had spent countless weekends tending, pruning, replanting after storms, nurturing after her careless landscapers trampled through it. And there, among the fading hydrangeas and stubborn marigolds clinging to the season, I pulled out my phone. The messages were there, stacked neatly like little warnings. 3 missed calls from Richard Langston's office, 2 voicemails from Melanie, her voice sugary and tense. "Mother, we really need to finalize those papers. It's just a formality, I can swing by this afternoon if that makes it easier." I smiled faintly, thumb hovering over the delete button. She was scrambling. I let the messages linger for now. A record, evidence, the little threads tightening into a noose. Later that afternoon, I visited Mr. Aldridge's office again. This time, I brought the papers. Unopened, untouched, and entirely irrelevant now that the trust was active and ironclad. He flipped through them briefly, his brow arching at the signatures already neatly in place. Melanie's, Langston's, even a pre-filled notary line with a suspiciously familiar name. "They were planning to forge your consent," he said plainly. "They still might," I replied calmly. His eyes met mine, something sharp glinting behind his scholarly calm. "But they can't touch the house now. Or my accounts. Or my medical decisions. Or anything else they hope to absorb." A rare smile curved his lips. "Mrs. Harper, I almost feel sorry for them." Almost, I echoed my own smile, thin and steady. As I prepared to leave, he handed me a sleek black folder, copies of every document securing my estate, my assets, my freedom. I tucked it into my bag, the weight of it strangely comforting. When I returned home, Melanie was pacing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear, irritation etched across her features. "I don't care what the caterer says, fix it!" she snapped, whirling toward me as I entered. Her eyes softened instantly, the practiced concern sliding into place. "Oh, Mom, did you go to your book club this morning?" I let the lie linger in the air, pleasant and convenient. "Something like that." She smiled, relieved by my passivity, and launched into a monologue about party logistics, seating charts, wine pairings, which neighbor had RSVP'd, which hadn't. I listened, nodding occasionally, while inside, I savored the quiet shift of power beneath the surface. When she finally paused to sip her coffee, I spoke. "Have you spoken to Mr. Langston today?" Her eyes flicked toward me, surprise barely masked. "Oh, I think he tried calling. Why?" "He left me a few messages," I said simply. "Sounds like he's eager to finalize those papers." Her smile tightened. "Well, yes, but no rush, right? Just formalities." I nodded. "Of course, just formalities." She exhaled, visibly relieved, entirely unaware that I'd already unraveled every thread of her plan. That evening, I slipped into Tyler's room after dinner. He sat at his desk, sketching quietly, an old habit of his that Melanie never encouraged but I always adored. "Got a minute?" I asked softly. He looked up, eyes brightening. "Yeah." I sat beside him, watching his pencil glide across the page, shading the outlines of a tree sturdy and deeply rooted. "I need you to be prepared," I began carefully. "Your mom, she's going to struggle when all this unfolds." His pencil paused mid-stroke. "Because of the trust?" "Because she built her life on the illusion of control," I corrected gently. "And that illusion is about to crack." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of it. "You've done nothing wrong, Tyler. You've seen the truth, and you acted with kindness, with courage." His jaw set, the quiet determination I'd come to admire settling across his young face. "She doesn't control me." "No," I agreed. "She doesn't." We sat in silence for a moment, the house around us humming with quiet deception, and the faint strains of Melanie's voice drifting from the living room, still orchestrating her grand display. But beneath all of it, I could feel the foundation shifting, steady, inevitable, unstoppable. And soon, she would feel it too. 2 days later, the first visible crack finally appeared, and it wasn't subtle. I was in the kitchen brewing tea when Melanie stormed through the front door, slamming it hard enough to rattle the antique mirror in the foyer. Her heels clacked across the marble floor, each step sharp and uneven like her breath. I stayed by the stove, stirring honey into my tea as if nothing unusual was happening. "Mother!" Her voice was tight, frayed around the edges. "Have you been ignoring Mr. Langston?" I turned slowly, letting the steam from my cup swirl lazily in the air between us. "I wouldn't say ignoring," I answered evenly. "Just not entertaining his requests." Her eyes flashed. "Do you have any idea how serious this is? Those papers are meaningless." I finished for her, my tone calm, almost indulgent. "Because the house, the accounts, everything is secured. Irrevocably." She froze, the color draining from her face as the words settled like a weight between us. What do you mean, secured?" Her voice cracked ever so slightly. "I mean, dear," I replied gently, "you don't have access. Not now, not ever." She opened her mouth, but the words tangled, falling flat. For a moment, silence stretched long and taut between us. I could see her scrambling internally, running through mental checklists of lawyers' loopholes, desperate phone calls to Richard Langston that would now lead nowhere. "How could you?" she started, but I held up a hand, silencing her. "I've spent years funding your life, Mel. quietly, without complaint. But somewhere along the way, you mistook my silence for permission, my love for weakness. She blinked rapidly, her composure slipping like a poorly pinned scarf. Do you have any idea what kind of mess this creates? The party, the mortgage, Tyler's tuition. Tyler's tuition is covered, I interrupted coolly. The house, however, well, that's your mess now. Her lips parted, but for once, no performance, no smooth manipulation followed. Just raw, stunned silence. She backed away a step, her manicured hand brushing against the granite countertop. I paid for the same one she bragged about at brunches, claiming it was all part of her hard-earned success. For the first time, she looked small in this house. The walls that once echoed her false confidence now seemed to lean in on her heavy with inconvenient truths. I need some air, she muttered, grabbing her purse with shaky hands before disappearing out the door. I stood there for a long while after sipping my tea as the house settled around me. The scent of chamomile drifted upward, soft and steady, grounding me. In that moment, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. That evening, Tyler found me in the garden, kneeling beside the hydrangeas. "Grandma," he said quietly, crouching beside me. "I heard." I looked at him, the worry etched into his young face. "You did the right thing," he added, almost as if he needed reassurance as much as I did. "I know," I said simply. "But it'll get worse before it gets better." He nodded, pulling at the stray weed beside the flowers. We worked in silence for a while, the dusk settling over the yard, the cicadas humming low. It was peaceful for the first time in years. Later that night, I lay awake in bed, the soft hum of the ceiling fan above me. My phone buzzed with new messages. Melanie's voice, frantic and clipped, pleading and threatening in equal measure. I didn't answer. Instead, I listened to the quiet house, the house I'd saved, the house that no longer felt like a burden pressing down on me. The foundation had shifted, the walls had held, and now? It was her turn to feel the weight of consequence. The next morning came with an eerie calm, like that stillness right before a summer storm breaks open the sky. I brewed my tea, sliced a few strawberries for breakfast, and sat by the window in my suite, my little corner, as Melanie used to so graciously call it. The house beyond the glass looked picture perfect. The hedges trimmed the porch immaculate, the front walk swept clean. But beneath all that polish, cracks spreading. At 9 a.m. sharp, the front door opened. I didn't need to look to know who it was. Mother Melanie's voice floated down the hall. "We need to talk." I sipped my tea. Let her come to me. A moment later, she appeared in the doorway, arms crossed, sunglasses perched like armor over her eyes. "We've got a serious problem." I raised an eyebrow, folding the newspaper in my lap. "I imagine we do." "The bank called. Again." She pulled off her sunglasses, tossing them onto my side table with practiced drama. "The mortgage, it's overdue. The auto payments are canceled, and they flagged the account for review. They're threatening foreclosure, Mother. Do you understand what that means?" I took another sip of tea, savoring the warmth. "It means they'll finally talk to you instead of me." Her jaw clenched. "This isn't funny. I'm not laughing." For a beat, her eyes flitted across the room, searching for some thread to pull some weak spot. But there was nothing left exposed. "You can't just walk away from this," she tried, her voice faltering at the edges. "You can't just dump this mess on me." "Melanie," I said softly, "this isn't a mess I made." Her lips parted, outrage brewing, but before she could speak, another voice chimed in from the hallway. "Mom!" Tyler stood there, backpack slung over one shoulder, watching us both with wary eyes. Melanie straightened, forcing a brittle smile. "It's fine, sweetheart. Grandma and I are just sorting through some grown-up stuff." His gaze flicked to me, reading between her lines. I gave him the smallest nod, and his shoulders relaxed. As he left for school, I turned back to Melanie. "I've sorted through grown-up stuff for you for 8 years, I reminded her gently. "Now it's your turn." Panic rippled beneath her forced composure. "You don't understand how complicated this is," she hissed, stepping closer. "The party, the investors. My business depends on appearances." "Your business depends on my savings," I corrected coolly. "Or at least it used to." Her face twisted, the mask slipping for just a second. "I've made arrangements," I added before she could respond. "Legal ones. Everything I own is protected now. And Tyler, well, he's not as blind as you think. For once, she looked genuinely stunned. You told him, she asked, voice cracking. You've poisoned him against me. I shook my head. No, Melanie, you did that. Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. It wasn't grief. It was fear. Fear of losing the safety net she'd wrapped around herself like a silk scarf, too proud to admit it had always been mine. You'll regret this, she whispered finally. When you're old, alone, when you need someone and there's no one left. I stood smoothing my sweater, my voice as steady as my hands. Better alone than used, I said softly. Her mouth opened, but the words never came. She turned heels, clicking angrily down the hall, and disappeared upstairs. I let out a slow breath and returned to my tea. Outside, the clouds thickened gray and heavy. The storm wasn't far now, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of getting wet. The storm broke that night. Rain hammered the windows like an angry warning, the kind that rattles in your bones and refuses to be ignored. I stood by my window, watching sheets of water blur the manicured hedges and clean porch Melanie was so proud of. Funny how nature didn't care how polished your facade was. It peeled everything back eventually. A sharp knock on my door interrupted the sound of rain. Mother. Her voice muffled but sharp as ever. I didn't answer immediately. I let her knock again. Finally, I opened the door. Melanie stood there, drenched from head to toe. Her hair clung to her face, her blouse soaked through. She'd clearly been outside, whether she'd stormed off for dramatic effect or had taken a call on the patio I didn't ask. I need you to fix this, she snapped, stepping inside without waiting for permission. I stayed by the door, arms crossed, calm. Fix what exactly? Her eyes flared. The house, the mortgage, the everything. You can't just disappear financially and expect me to clean up the mess. I arched an eyebrow. I believe that's exactly what you've been doing to me for years. Don't twist this, she snapped. You've always been part of this. You've always funded this? I finished, voice steady. Yes, I have. She paced the small sitting area, raindrops dripping onto the polished floors. Her frustration was tangible now, her carefully managed world fraying at the edges. I spoke to the bank, she admitted, voice low. They said the payments stopped weeks ago. I nodded. They also mentioned a trust. Her gaze snapped to mine. An irrevocable trust. Your name, not mine, not Tyler's. A slow breath filled my lungs. So she'd finally caught up. That's correct, I said simply. The shock registered on her face only briefly before it morphed into something colder. You've been planning this. All along. Planning, I mused. No, Melanie. Protecting. Her shoulders tensed. From me, I didn't answer right away. Instead, I crossed the room and retrieved a small folder from my desk, the one Mr. Aldridge had given me weeks ago. Quiet. Final. I handed it to her. Inside were the legal documents, the trust paperwork, the transfer of assets, the official notice of her removal from any claim to my estate. She flipped through the pages, color draining from her cheeks with every line. You went to a lawyer behind my back, she whispered, horror curling through her voice. You went to your friends behind mine, I reminded her. Called me dead weight, planned to squeeze every last penny from me while I stayed tucked away in this generous little suite. Her mouth opened, protest hovering, but no words came. You've made your choices, Melanie, I added softly. I've made mine. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain beating against the glass. Finally, her hands dropped to her sides, the folder forgotten. You think this makes you powerful? She asked, voice shaking with anger or fear. I couldn't tell. You think cutting me off, humiliating me, that's victory? I tilted my head, considering her. No, I said quietly. It's survival. She stormed out without another word, slamming the door behind her. I stayed by the window long after watching the storm wash over the house. The real storm that was still brewing inside these walls. But I was ready for it now. The next morning, the house felt heavier. Melanie's footsteps echoed down the hall like gunshots, sharp, purposeful, louder than they needed to be. The kind of performance meant for an audience, except I wasn't playing along anymore. She slammed cabinets in the kitchen, barked orders at the landscaper. pounded away on her phone, her voice dripping sugar for the people on the other end of the line. But underneath it all, I could hear it. The crack in her confidence, the slip in her control. Tyler noticed too. At breakfast, he stirred his cereal absently, eyes flicking toward the hallway every time her voice cut through the silence. "She's spiraling," he whispered under his breath. I sipped my tea steady as ever. "She'll run out of steam eventually." He didn't look convinced. I couldn't blame him. By noon, the doorbell rang, a courier envelope in hand. I signed for it without thinking, but the second I saw the sender, Hawthorne and Bell attorneys at law, I knew. Melanie wasn't just spiraling, she was fighting back. The envelope was thick. Inside, a formal letter from her attorney drafted with the kind of polished venom only money could buy. A request for mediation. A thinly veiled threat of legal action if I didn't reconsider the trust, reinstate her as a beneficiary. And this one made me laugh, return to the previous financial arrangement for the sake of familial harmony. Familial harmony, a fancy way of saying, give me back control, or else. I folded the letter neatly and tucked it away in my desk. Let them try. By the time Melanie slunk back into the house that evening, her fake sweetness had worn thin. She hovered in the doorway of my suite. Arms crossed, eyes narrowed. "Did you get the letter?" I didn't look up from my book. I did. And I've already spoken to my attorney." Her jaw clenched. "You really want to drag this through court? Humiliate me? Embarrass the family?" I set the book down and met her eyes evenly. "You've already embarrassed yourself, Melanie. I'm just cleaning up the mess." She opened her mouth, ready to argue, to beg, to threaten, but no words came. Just a long, sharp breath as the reality of it settled over her. The game had changed. I wasn't her quiet, convenient resource anymore. I was the opposition. Later that night, I slipped the folder of documents into my purse and double-checked the small lockbox hidden in the closet, copies of every receipt, every transfer, every scrap of evidence I'd need if this escalated. Melanie thought this was still about pride. She had no idea. It was about survival now, and I had no intention of losing. The following weeks passed with a quiet, unnerving tension settling over the house like fog. Every room I entered, every conversation, it all carried the weight of what was unsaid. Melanie wasn't stomping around anymore, wasn't slamming doors or barking orders at me like I was her personal assistant. No, she'd changed tactics. The Cold War had begun. She became sugary sweet, overly polite in that brittle, artificial way that set your teeth on edge. Fresh flowers appeared in the living room. She offered me coffee in the mornings. She even invited me to lunch one afternoon, her smile stretched too wide across her face. It was all strategy, of course. A performance for the neighbors, for Tyler, for anyone who might be watching. But beneath that porcelain mask, I could see it, the panic. The growing awareness that her empire built on my silence was crumbling. Meanwhile, I stayed steady. The trust was secure. The bank accounts inaccessible to her. My apartment lease signed, the move-in date approaching. Tyler's decision to come with me made it all feel even more permanent. Melanie had lost control of the money. Now she was trying to claw her way back through manipulation. I let her. The more she danced, the deeper she sank into her own web. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the house basked in that golden hour glow, I sat quietly in the garden, pruning the rose bushes. Tyler hovered nearby, scrolling through his phone, but I could feel his unease. "She's not going to give up, you know," he finally muttered. I snipped a dead bloom from the stem. "I know. You ready for that?" I glanced up at him, his young face pinched with worry. My grandson, the boy who once clung to my leg during thunderstorms, was taller now, but still carried that old protective softness in his eyes. I smiled faintly. "Tyler, I've been ready longer than you've been alive." He chuckled under his breath, but didn't argue. Inside, through the window, I spotted Melanie pacing in the kitchen, phone pressed to her ear. Her voice was low, her face tight with frustration. She was losing allies, fast. Word was spreading: the unpaid mortgage, the canceled credit cards, the mounting debt she could no longer cover with charm and borrowed time. The friends she'd so carefully curated were retreating. The invitations slowed, the dinner parties thinned, and beneath it all, I could almost hear the house itself exhaling, as if relieved to shed the false glitter, the endless performances. It wasn't victory yet, but the tide was turning. And this time, it was carrying me forward. It happened sooner than I expected the final unraveling. I was making tea one rainy Tuesday morning when Melanie's voice, sharp and shrill, echoed from the hallway. I heard the front door slam, her heels clicking frantically against the hardwood floor as she stormed toward the kitchen. I didn't look up as she appeared in the doorway, soaked in frustration, clutching a crumpled piece of paper in one trembling hand. "You think you've won, don't you?" she hissed, waving the paper like a white flag that had caught fire. I set my teacup down carefully, keeping my movements measured. "I'm not playing a game, Melanie." Her eyes gleamed with unshed tears. But they weren't the kind that came from sorrow. No, these were tears of rage, the kind that bloom when someone realizes they've lost control, and there's no path back to the throne. "I just got this from the bank," she snapped, thrusting the paper onto the counter. "Final notice. Foreclosure proceedings. They're taking the house, Mom." I glanced at the letter, unsurprised. I had known this was coming. "And what do you want me to do about it?" I asked, voice steady, teetering right on that quiet edge of exhaustion and clarity. Her jaw clenched. "You know what I want. You've always fixed everything. You swoop in, write the check, save the day. So go ahead, save it now." For a moment, I said nothing. I simply let the silence stretch between us, heavy and uncomfortable, the way a wound aches before it bleeds. Then softly, I said no. Melanie's face contorted, a mixture of disbelief and fury tightening her features. "You can't just abandon me like this, after everything I've done for you." I nearly laughed. Everything she's done for me. The words tasted bitter like ash on my tongue. "You mean after everything I've done for you?" I corrected, calm as a still lake. "Melanie, I saved this house. I built the life you parade around, and I've watched you chip away at me year after year like I was nothing but dead weight." Her lip quivered. I kept going. "You told your friends I was useless. You called me a burden. You made it clear I wasn't welcome in the home I paid for. And now you want my help because the walls are caving in." She shook her head, desperate, panicked. "It's not like that." "It's exactly like that." She faltered, her eyes darting to the window as if searching for witnesses, for escape routes, for someone to swoop in and reset the scene. But there was no audience this time. Just me and Tyler, who stood quietly in the hallway behind her, watching. Melanie followed my gaze, turning to see him. His expression wasn't angry. It was worse. It was disappointed. "Mom!" he began, but his voice cracked, years of hurt simmering beneath the surface. Melanie's bravado faltered completely then. The mask slipped, revealing the fear, the cracks in her carefully curated persona. "We'll lose everything," she whispered, almost childlike now. "Tyler, our home. Please, Mom, just help me." I picked up my tea, savoring the warmth for a moment before replying. "I already have," I said softly. "More than you'll ever understand. But you mistook my love for weakness. You thought my silence meant you'd won." Her shoulders sagged, the fight draining from her as reality set in. "This isn't punishment," I added. "It's consequences." She blinked back tears, but I turned away, the conversation over. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Tyler approach her, hesitation written across his face, before he quietly walked past her and followed me. Melanie remained frozen in the kitchen, her empire of borrowed luxury collapsing brick by brick. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. The rain had stopped by evening, leaving the air cool and heavy with that fresh, earthy scent, the kind that always reminds me of new beginnings, or maybe just the quiet aftermath of a storm. I sat on the small balcony of my apartment, a cup of tea in my hand, watching the city lights flicker to life as dusk settled in. Tyler sat beside me, his long legs stretched out, his face, unusually quiet eyes, lost somewhere on the horizon. Neither of us spoke for a while. There wasn't much left to say. Melanie had left 3 voicemails in the past 2 hours. The same frantic pleading disguised as rage. The same denial that had carried her through life like a shield she never learned to lower. I hadn't returned her calls. I wouldn't. "You okay?" Tyler asked softly, finally breaking the silence. I glanced at him, his profile sharp in the fading light. The same strong jawline his grandfather had. The same quiet eyes I used to see staring up at me as a toddler, trusting, hopeful. "I'm better than I've been in years," I answered truthfully. He nodded, but didn't smile. His gaze drifted back to the skyline. I don't think she'll bounce back from this, he murmured after a pause. The house, the debt, it's all coming down on her at once. I exhaled slowly. The ache in my chest was still there, the mother's ache. That stubborn, unavoidable tug of love that never quite dissolves, no matter how far someone pushes you away. She chose this Tyler, I said quietly. She built her life on borrowed things, money, charm, reputation. None of it was real, and borrowed things always come due. The city below us buzzed softly, car horns in the distance, the hum of life moving forward whether you wanted it to or not. She keeps texting me too, Tyler admitted, voice low. Trying to guilt me, asking me to convince you to come back, to fix it. I smiled faintly into my tea. You're not responsible for her choices. I know, he replied, but his eyes still carried the weight of it. The weight I once bore alone. She'll figure it out, I added gently. Or she won't. But either way, it's not ours to carry anymore. A long pause stretched between us before he finally whispered, I always thought you'd never stand up to her. I tilted my head amused. So did she. We both chuckled, the sound quiet but real. It eased something tight between my ribs. I reached over, brushing his hair back from his forehead like I used to when he was little. His eyes closed briefly at the familiar gesture. She doesn't get to define us, sweetheart, I told him softly. Not you. Not me. Not anymore. He opened his eyes, the corner of his mouth lifting in a genuine small smile. You're a lot stronger than people think, he said. I sipped my tea, the warmth grounding me. I've had decades of practice. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. I wasn't bracing for the next demand, the next jab wrapped in a smile. The house, the debts, the burden, it wasn't mine anymore. I was free, and freedom, I was learning, tasted like quiet evenings on a city balcony. And finally, peace. The days that followed drifted by quietly, the way clouds roll past without fanfare when no one's paying attention. I'd wake up to sunlight creeping through the sheer curtains of my small apartment, the smell of fresh coffee from the pot Tyler insisted on setting every morning. It was simple, modest, but it was mine. And every morning, like clockwork, the phone buzzed. Voicemails, texts, some furious, others pitiful. Melanie. I never responded. At first, her words were sharp with indignation, rage at my abandonment, as she called it. Her voice trembled with entitlement, thick with that brittle confidence that had always cracked when things didn't bend her way. But when the final notices arrived, when the mortgage company escalated from polite reminders to formal warnings, her tone changed. The voicemails turned desperate. She begged, Mom, I messed up, okay? But you can't just leave me like this? You always said we were family, that we took care of each other. Please, I need your help. And then finally, when I didn't answer, came the real fear. The unraveling. I heard it in her last message, her voice small, shaky, like the walls were closing in. They're going to take the house, Mom. The bank. I can't do this alone. I deleted the message, not out of cruelty, but because I'd already done what I could. I'd given every ounce of myself, my money, my time, my peace for years. And all it had bought me was a front row seat to my own erasure in her story. The house, the one I'd saved, the one I paid for, was never really home. Not after the lines blurred, after generosity became expectation, and expectation turned into resentment. She didn't love me. She loved what I provided. And when that ran dry, so did her affection. Tyler found me at the kitchen table that afternoon, sorting through papers. He watched me quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Mom's losing the house, he said, not as a question, a fact. I nodded, flipping through the envelope from my lawyer, the documents that shielded what little I had left. The ones that secured my future from being swallowed by hers again. She called me today, Tyler added, shifting uncomfortably. Tried to guilt me, said I was ungrateful, that I was choosing sides. I set the papers down and looked at him. You didn't choose sides, sweetheart. You chose boundaries. He exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly, but his eyes were still clouded with that old familiar weight. Feels the same sometimes. I reached over, squeezing his hand. It's not. Silence filled the kitchen for a moment, save for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Finally, Tyler spoke again. What happens to her now? I thought about that longer than I probably needed to. The question was simple. The answer wasn't. She figures it out, I replied, my voice calm. Or she doesn't. But either way, it's not our burden to carry. His brow furrowed slightly. Is it bad that I don't feel sorry for her? I shook my head. It's human. Because that's what it was, really. Human. Messy. Complicated. Love wasn't some neat, untouchable thing. It frayed. It tore. Sometimes it just withered. And what was left wasn't always hate. Sometimes it was nothing at all. You're allowed to protect your peace, Tyler, I added gently. Even from your own mother. A faint smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, bittersweet and quiet. The phone buzzed again on the table between us. Melanie. I silenced it without even glancing at the screen. For the first time in my life, I wasn't scrambling to fix everything. I wasn't bending, breaking, patching the cracks with pieces of myself. I was still, rooted. And no amount of pleading rage or manipulation could shake that now. The house would fall. Her facade would crumble. And me, I'd already rebuilt. The foreclosure notice came 2 weeks later. Not to me, of course. I had no stake in the property anymore. Not legally, not financially, not emotionally. But word travels quickly in small towns, especially when it's the kind of news that fuels whispered conversations over garden fences and grocery store checkout lines. I was walking back from the market, a brown paper bag tucked under my arm, when I overheard the neighbors talking. Mrs. Langley and her sister chatting near their mailbox. Such a shame, Mrs. Langley was saying, her voice hushed but tinged with curiosity. All that money into the house, and now the bank's seizing it. Her sister clicked her tongue. I heard they already posted the notice on the door. Poor woman, all alone now. They didn't notice me passing, or maybe they did and didn't recognize me anymore. It didn't matter. Their words weren't cruel, just inevitable, like watching a slow-moving storm finally touch down. I continued walking, each step lighter than the last. Later that evening, Tyler came home with his backpack slung over one shoulder, his eyes heavy with concern. He held up his phone. She called again. I raised a brow, setting my tea aside. You answer? He shook his head. No, but I drove by the house after school. I waited, knowing the weight of what he'd say next. They posted the foreclosure notice, he confirmed quietly. It's real now. I exhaled slowly, staring into the steam rising from my cup. It wasn't joy I felt. It wasn't even satisfaction. Just release. The final string untied. The final tether severed. She'll have to leave soon, Tyler added, voice uncertain. She's losing everything. I nodded, my expression unreadable. She lost it long before the bank got involved. Because that's the truth, isn't it? You can lose people, relationships, trust, all without a legal document to prove it. The paperwork just catches up eventually. Tyler sat down across from me, his jaw tight. I don't know how to feel. Conflicted, I supplied gently. Sad, angry, relieved. All of that, he admitted, running a hand through his hair. I reached across the table, resting my palm over his. His skin was warm, steady beneath my touch. It's okay not to feel just one thing, I whispered. You're allowed to feel it all. The room fell quiet for a while, save for the distant hum of city traffic through the window. The world outside kept moving, uncaring of the quiet wars waged behind closed doors. Eventually, Tyler broke the silence. Do you think she'll come here when it happens? I considered the question, the possibility of Melanie showing up on my doorstep, desperate, unraveling. She might, I said honestly, but this time we don't open the door. He nodded his shoulders, easing the decision, grounding him like roots settling into new soil. And I meant it. The door, figurative, literal, was closed now. Locked. Not in anger, not in spite, but in protection. For me, for Tyler, for the fragile piece we were finally building away from the toxic web of expectation and manipulation. As the evening deepened and shadows crept across the walls, I stood by the window looking out at the quiet street below. I thought of the house I'd once fought so hard to save, the walls I'd patched, the floors I'd polished, the memories layered beneath every coat of paint. It wasn't mine anymore. It never really had been. But here in this small, sunlit apartment, surrounded by simple things I'd chosen for myself, I finally felt what I had chased for years. Freedom. It didn't come wrapped in grandeur or applause. It arrived quietly on the heels of loss, carrying nothing but peace. And that I realized was enough. I never thought it would feel this quiet. Not lonely, not empty, just quiet. The final moving trucks had left Melanie's house, what used to be Melanie's house, a week ago. I didn't go by. I didn't need to. The whispers around town filled in every detail like puzzle pieces falling into place. The bank took possession. The new owners were some investment firm already drafting plans to gut the place, flip it, and list it for double the price. The irony wasn't lost on me. After all that, after the fights, the manipulation, the cruel words, it would still be sold, just not on her terms. Melanie? Well, no one really knew where she landed yet. Some motel on the outskirts of town, maybe? A friend's spare room temporarily. Word is, she burned a lot of bridges when the truth started unraveling, the unpaid debts, the lies, the smug stories that didn't hold water once the foreclosure notice was pinned to her front door. I hadn't heard from her. She tried a few times voicemails that ranged from weepy apologies to venom-laced blame. I didn't return them. I couldn't, not for her and not for myself. That chapter was closed, slammed shut if I'm being honest. It was a sunny Thursday when Tyler and I unpacked the last box in my apartment. Nothing fancy. Just framed photos, old books, a few worn knickknacks that had followed me from house to house across decades. They weren't worth much on paper, but they carried the weight of every version of me. I've been the young wife, the determined mother, the quietly breaking woman, the one who finally stood up. Tyler set down the last picture, a small snapshot of him as a toddler perched on my lap. Both of us beaming like the world hadn't gotten complicated yet. "You sure you don't want to hang this?" he asked, holding it up with a teasing grin. I smiled, the edges of my heart softening. "No, I do, but not here." I walked over, took the frame gently, and placed it on the nightstand by my bed. Not in the living room where guests might gawk. Not on a mantle for show. Just somewhere private. Mine. We stood there for a minute, the sunlight cutting across the floor in warm, golden lines. "Feels weird," Tyler admitted, stuffing his hands in his pockets. "Good weird, but still weird." "New always does," I replied softly. He nodded, then glanced at the modest kitchen, the small but tidy living space. "You sure you're okay? Downsizing this much? After, well, everything." I followed his gaze, letting it settle on the simple surroundings. It wasn't the sprawling house with imported light fixtures or polished floors. It wasn't the manicured yard or the fancy dining room with the chandelier I'd never really liked. It was enough. It's funny, I mused, crossing my arms loosely. All those years, I thought space and square footage meant security. But it turns out peace takes up a lot less room. Tyler chuckled softly. Guess that makes sense. We spent the afternoon in quiet company, rearranging a few things, hanging shelves, sharing a meal that wasn't interrupted by tension or expectation. For the first time in years, dinner wasn't eaten with clenched jaws or quiet resentment simmering beneath forced conversation. It was peaceful. And that night, as the city hummed softly beyond my window, I finally allowed myself the simplest luxury of all. Rest. No nagging fears. No second-guessing my place under someone else's roof. No mental math calculating how much more I could give before there was nothing left of me. Just stillness. I drifted off to sleep with the faintest smile curling my lips, knowing I'd paid every debt, financial, emotional, spiritual. And in their place, I'd bought back the one thing no one could fake, force, or fabricate: freedom.